There's something about old men that young boys always forget. They forget the years, they forget the scars, they forget the silence that comes from surviving what louder men never could. It was just another Saturday afternoon in a small American town. A community center had been transformed for the day into a local martial arts showcase. Red and blue mats lined the floor. Families filled the fold-out chairs. Children practiced their forms behind curtains while parents held phones high, ready to record. It was meant to be a celebration, a tribute to tradition, a monthly event called Warriors Week, dedicated to honoring those who had served both on the battlefield and in the dojo. But not everyone came for the same reason. Some came to remember, others came to be seen, and then there were those who came to learn, whether they wanted to or not. That afternoon, a name was called over the mic. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't hyped, just a soft announcement. Please welcome Mr. Arthur Bell, United States Army retired, three-time karate champion, instructor since 1986. There was polite applause, but not much more. The younger crowd barely lifted their heads from their phones. A few teenagers exchanged looks. They had seen Arthur before, that quiet man who walked with a limp, always sitting in the back during practices. He'd offered to help once or twice. Nobody really listened. But today, he was invited onto the floor. Arthur stepped forward, moving slowly but with dignity. He wore a faded gi, no patches, no flashy belts, just white cloth and a history too deep for ceremony. His hair was silver, his skin worn, and his eyes? They were sharp, the kind that had stared down more than just opponents. He bowed, and the room barely responded. Some clapped. One young man didn't. He laughed. Tall, athletic, barely 18, and already a local karate star. His name was Chase Landon. Fast hands, big ego, a mouth that moved faster than his discipline ever could. He leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, whispering to his friends just loud enough for others to hear. Should have brought a walker for the guy. His friends laughed, but someone else didn't. Back row, last seat on the left. A man sat watching, still as stone. No reaction, no movement, just eyes. Jason Statham. He hadn't announced his presence. He didn't want a spotlight. He came to support a friend, nothing more. He had trained with Arthur once, years ago, in silence and sweat, without trophies or followers. Jason owed him more than he could put into words, but Chase didn't know that. Nobody did. And that ignorance was about to cost more than pride. Arthur reached the center of the mat and stood alone. He wasn't there to fight, just to demonstrate. A few slow movements. A kata passed down over generations, the kind that teaches you not how to fight, but why. As he began, his hands moved like poetry, deliberate, balanced, precise. But the silence was broken again by Chase. He stepped forward with an exaggerated bow and a smirk, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let me help you warm up, old man." Arthur stopped, looked at him, didn't blink. Chase circled him like a predator pretending to play. He mimicked Arthur's stance, exaggerated his moves, laughed. The crowd chuckled, unsure whether it was part of the act. It wasn't. Jason leaned forward slightly in his chair. He didn't move yet, but his right hand slowly rested on his left wrist. It was instinct, observation, preparation. On the mat, Chase got closer. He feinted a kick. Arthur didn't respond, so Chase pushed him. It wasn't violent, but it wasn't respectful either. Arthur stumbled slightly and caught himself. The room went quiet. It wasn't funny anymore, but Chase grinned, proud of his moment. And in that silence, Jason stood. No words, just motion, a presence rising, not rushed, not loud, but the air changed. Those close to him turned. A few recognized him. Their eyes widened, their posture changed. The man who had been invisible seconds ago now felt larger than the room. Jason walked toward the mats. His footsteps echoed like thunder no one saw coming. And still, Chase laughed. Still, he didn't know. But he would. Because in every man's life, there's a moment when he realizes he's no longer the strongest in the room. And Chase was about to learn that power without honor always finds its limit. Jason reached the edge of the mat. He didn't look at Chase. He looked at Arthur, the man still standing with quiet pride. And as Chase turned to speak again, Jason stepped onto the mat without saying a word. The crowd leaned forward. Phones dropped, and for the first time that day, silence meant respect. Jason stepped onto the mat with the calm precision of a man who didn't need to announce himself. His eyes didn't search for approval. He didn't adjust his posture for effect. He simply moved, the way trained men move when instinct takes over and pride stays behind. Chase finally noticed him. He smirked again, clearly not recognizing who had just entered the space beside him. To Chase, it was just another older guy who looked like he hadn't fought in years, someone trying to protect a relic from a time that didn't matter anymore. Jason didn't speak. He looked once toward Arthur Bell, and in that silent glance, a conversation passed between them, the kind forged only through years of shared sweat, bruises, and a code that doesn't change with time. Arthur nodded, stepped back, and allowed the space to shift. It wasn't his moment anymore. It was Jason's. Chase rolled his neck and stepped closer. He gestured toward the crowd as if to say, "Can you believe this?" Jason remained still. In that moment, something unusual happened. The crowd, once full of chatter and curiosity, began to quiet. Phones lowered, voices fell, because even those who didn't know who Jason was felt it. They felt that shift in the atmosphere, the weight of presence, the discipline in posture, the complete absence of fear. And Chase, he kept talking, kept gesturing, but his voice began to sound smaller because Jason's silence had started speaking louder. Still, Chase took a stance. He bounced lightly on his feet, a grin still stretched across his face. He didn't know, and Jason wouldn't explain it with words. He would show him. The first movement was simple, a step forward, not fast, not aggressive, just enough to close the distance. Chase moved in, feinting left. Jason didn't react. Chase jabbed toward his shoulder, light, playful. Jason didn't blink. The audience watched, now hanging on every motion. Some of them recognized him now. Whispers spread through the first rows. "Is that Jason Statham? He's really here?" But Jason wasn't here to be recognized. He was here to remind. Chase tried again, a faster strike aimed at the chest. Theatrical, not dangerous. Jason caught it, one smooth motion. No drama, just a hand wrapping around a wrist and a pivot that redirected all of Chase's energy away from power and straight into vulnerability. Before Chase could register it, Jason stepped behind him, locked the elbow, and lowered him gently, but firmly, to the mat. No violence, no humiliation, just dominance without cruelty. Chase lay on the floor, stunned, eyes wide, gasping for understanding. Jason stepped back, not victorious, not proud, just done. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They were still processing what they'd seen. Not a fight, not a beatdown, but a man who showed full what strength really looked like. And Chase, he stayed down, not because he was hurt, but because for the first time he wasn't sure who he was anymore. Arthur Bell stepped forward. Jason looked at him once more, then turned to leave, but he didn't get far. Because Chase, stubborn and bruised in ego more than body, stood up and shouted, not with words but with his stance. He raised his hands again. He wanted another round. He hadn't learned yet. Jason paused, faced him, and walked back. The crowd's breath caught as Jason removed his jacket and placed it gently on the ground beside the mat. He tightened the belt of a borrowed GI, took a stance, simple, solid, unshakable. Chase lunged forward with everything he had left, and Jason moved like water. He didn't strike. He didn't counter with rage. He redirected, controlled, exposed the holes in Chase's form like opening a book he'd read 1,000 times. The match ended not with a blow, but with Chase flat on his back again, not hurt, but completely disarmed. This time, Jason didn't look down at him. He looked out into the crowd, at every young man watching, every father, every son, every trainer. He had made his point. The lesson wasn't for Chase alone, it was for all of them. For anyone who ever thought honor came from trophies, that wisdom came with age, and that the quiet ones in the back are the ones you should bow to first. As Jason walked off the mat, the crowd parted in silence. No applause, no noise, just respect. But from the shadows, a man stepped forward, someone from Arthur's past. And he didn't come for a demonstration. He came with a question only Jason could answer. The air shifted again. Not like earlier, when a boy tried to prove his worth with noise. This shift was colder, heavier, the kind that comes when ghosts walk into daylight. The man who stepped forward was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that once turned heads for the right reasons, and now did for the wrong ones. His GI was torn at the sleeve. Scars marked his knuckles like confessions carved into skin. He moved like someone who had once been great, and had spent years trying to forget why he wasn't anymore. His name was Riley Thorne. 10 years ago, he trained under Arthur Bell. He had talent, precision, potential, but he lacked something deeper, something Arthur could never teach him fast enough: humility. And when Arthur expelled him for crossing a line, for using what he learned not for protection, but for punishment, Riley disappeared. Until now. Jason turned slowly toward him. There was no shock on his face, no reaction at all. Because Jason had known this day would come. When men like Riley don't change, they circle back, not to fight you, but to challenge who you've become. The crowd murmured. Some didn't know who Riley was. Others remembered too well. A few instructors exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or observe. The announcer hesitated, but Riley didn't wait. He dropped into stance. It wasn't clean, it wasn't disciplined, it was emotional. Jason didn't move, not yet. Arthur Bell remained seated in the front row, his face unreadable. But his hands were folded tight, like a man who had taught every lesson except the one Riley refused to learn. Jason finally stepped forward. No ceremony, no acknowledgement, just the same stillness he carried through every storm. Riley circled him. His feet moved fast, his breathing sharp. He was younger than Jason, but not by much. Time hadn't broken him, but bitterness had. And that kind of weight makes even strong men slow. The first strike came fast, a sweeping kick. Jason blocked without looking down. Riley attacked again, a wild hook to the ribs. Jason stepped back, letting the force pass through the air where he'd been standing a second before. The crowd leaned forward. They weren't watching a fight, they were watching restraint. Because Jason didn't retaliate, he didn't counter, he absorbed, measured, waited. Riley's frustration grew. Every strike was met with silence. Every movement was shadowed by someone who had moved past the need to prove anything. Jason didn't dominate him with strength. He broke him with clarity. And that's what hurt Riley the most, because inside him was a truth he had never faced. He could hit hard, but Jason, he hit back without ever lifting a fist. And then it happened. Jason stepped forward, not with violence, but with finality. One hand gripped Riley's wrist, redirecting a punch into empty air. One leg swept his balance, one breath, and Riley was on the ground. not broken, but exposed. Jason stood over him, breathing steady. He didn't finish it. He didn't strike. He stepped back, allowing Riley the one thing he had never granted anyone else: a choice. To stay down and reflect, or rise and repeat. Riley didn't move, and in that stillness, something in the room healed. Because everyone watching, every young fighter, every old instructor, every father with a son beside him, had just witnessed what most never learn. That power is not in the takedown. It's in the decision to let go. Arthur Bell stood slowly, and for the first time in years, he bowed, not to Jason, to the lesson, because Jason had done what no punishment, no expulsion, no warning ever could. He had reached the one part of Riley that had never been touched: his conscience. Later that evening, as Jason prepared to leave, a student ran out to the parking lot with a folded piece of paper. "He left this for you," the boy said. Jason opened it slowly. Inside was a message in shaky handwriting, just 5 words. "He taught me. You proved it." But underneath, a signature Jason hadn't seen in decades. It wasn't from Riley. It was from someone else. Someone Jason believed was gone. The parking lot had emptied long ago. Only a few cars remained, scattered under flickering lights. The echo of earlier applause had vanished into the night, but for Jason Statham, something still lingered. Something heavier than bruises or victory. He stood alone beside his vehicle, the paper still unfolded in his hands. 5 words. Simple, direct, unexpected. "He taught me. You proved it." And below that, a signature, not Riley's, but someone else. Someone whose name Jason hadn't read in over 15 years. Michael Rourke. A name that had once meant loyalty, brotherhood, fire and shadow. They had trained together under Arthur Bell, fought together in places the world had long since forgotten. And then, one day, Michael disappeared. Not in death, in betrayal. He walked away from the code, from the discipline, from everything Arthur had poured into them. And Jason never heard from him again, until now. Jason read the signature again. It wasn't forged, it was real. Which meant Michael had been watching, somewhere, somehow. Not just today, but maybe longer. The letter had Riley's words, but Michael's presence. A silent message from someone who had left the path and was maybe trying to return. But why now? Jason folded the paper slowly, slid it into his pocket. He didn't react, didn't speak. But inside, the past had reopened a door he had locked for good reason. He got in the car and started the engine, but didn't drive. His eyes stayed on the rearview mirror, not watching for cars, but memories. Back inside the dojo, the event space had returned to stillness. Mats rolled, chairs folded. The janitor swept stray confetti into a metal pan. But one figure remained behind. Arthur Bell, sitting alone on the bench, gazing at the mat where Jason had stood. His posture didn't speak of exhaustion. It spoke of reflection, of a man who had seen more than just a fight. Jason walked back inside quietly. No one else saw him enter. Arthur didn't look at him, but he knew. Jason sat beside him. For a long moment, neither said a word. But what passed between them in that silence was more powerful than anything said aloud. Arthur finally spoke. Just one sentence, and Jason nodded. Because they both knew what was coming. This wasn't about Chase, or Riley, or even Michael. It was about what martial arts had become, and what it had lost: respect, legacy, memory. And Jason. He wasn't just a man who could fight, he was a man who remembered. Later that week, something unusual happened. Jason returned to the same dojo, not for a demonstration, not for a challenge, but for a conversation. He stood before a new class of students, young, eager, Some had seen the video clips online. Others were there because their parents had sent them. Jason didn't tell them about technique. He told them about stillness, about presence, about standing in the middle of chaos and choosing peace over rage, clarity over control. He didn't name drop. He didn't boast. He just stood there and said the one thing none of them expected. You don't train to win fights. You train so you never have to. The room fell silent, because real strength doesn't need an audience. And Jason had just reminded them of that. Arthur watched from the doorway. For the first time in a long time, he smiled, but as Jason left the building that day, a man waited by his car. Black jacket, grey beard, a scar across the left eye. It was Michael Rourke. Older, slower, but very much alive. He didn't step forward. He just nodded, the kind of nod men give when they finally understand what they walked away from. Jason paused. No words, just a glance and a choice, to walk away again or to forgive. Jason reached into his pocket and handed Michael the folded letter. I read it, he said, his first and only words of the day. Michael looked at the paper, then at Jason. You're still teaching, he replied. And before Jason could respond, another figure appeared from the shadows. A teenager, quiet, watching, waiting. Michael looked at Jason. He's my son, he said. I brought him here because he needs you. The boy couldn't have been more than 15, slender frame, hands clenched in his hoodie pocket, eyes somewhere between fear and curiosity, the kind that come from watching a father carry too much silence and not enough answers. Michael Rourke placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, but it was Jason the boy kept staring at, not with awe, with confusion, because his father had told him stories of battles, of honor, of a man who walked away when Michael didn't, and now that man stood before him, flesh, bone, stillness. Jason didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just gestured toward the dojo doors, and together they walked back inside. Arthur Bell was still there. He always was, sitting alone on the edge of the mat like an old tree, roots deep, branches still reaching. He looked up as the three entered, but he didn't rise. He simply nodded, as if to say, let it begin. Jason guided the boy to the mat. No ceremony, just motion. He didn't ask his name. He didn't ask what he knew. He showed him how to stand, where to place his feet, how to breathe. The boy followed, clumsy but focused. Michael sat at the edge, watching in silence. His hands fidgeted, a man unused to stillness. Jason corrected the boy's balance, showed him how not to fight, but to be ready. Minutes passed, then hours, and slowly the tension in the boy's shoulders began to melt. Because Jason didn't teach like most instructors. He didn't explain. He demonstrated. He didn't command. He modeled. And the boy, without realizing it, was beginning to understand something his father had never said out loud, that true strength was never about dominance. It was about restraint. Later that evening, Jason stood outside the dojo with Michael once again. The boy was inside, practicing with Arthur now. Michael looked at Jason with the eyes of a man who had lost decades and didn't want to waste another minute. He didn't apologize. Jason didn't ask him to, but what passed between them was forgiveness without language. Before they parted, Michael placed a medal in Jason's hand, old, worn, from a mission long past. I kept it, he said. Jason looked down at the medal, then back up at the boy training inside. And he understood. It wasn't for him. It was for the one who still had time to learn. Michael walked away, and Jason, he stayed. For the next week, Jason returned daily, not as a guest, not as a legend, but as a teacher. Students began to gather, not because of who he was, but because of what he gave. Presence, clarity, respect. The dojo transformed, the noise quieted, phones stayed in pockets, and the lessons returned to what they once were, what Arthur had built long ago. Not just kicks and strikes, but a discipline and silence. One afternoon, the boy, Michael's son, stepped forward after practice. He bowed, but not like before. This time, it was different, slower, deeper. Jason returned the bow, and in that moment, a new generation was born. One that wouldn't follow influences, but leaders. Men who knew when to strike and when to simply walk away. Weeks later, the dojo held a ceremony. No competition, just recognition. Arthur sat at the front, older now, but his eyes still sharp. Jason stood behind the students, not as a figurehead, as one of them, a student again, learning always. When it was time to close the event, a microphone was offered to him. He didn't take it. He stepped forward, placed the medal Michael had given him on the floor in front of the class, and walked away. The students rose in silence. No one clapped, no one filmed. They just stood, straight, quiet, and ready. And Jason, he never looked back, because what mattered had already taken root. Some men teach with their fists, others teach with their presence. But the rarest of men, they teach by letting go. Jason Statham didn't just protect a veteran, he revived a code, one the world had started to forget. You don't bow to the strongest man in the room. You bow to the one who teaches others how to rise. If this story moved you, if you believe the world needs more fathers like Jason, more teachers like Arthur, and more lessons like these, subscribe to the channel. Because real stories like this still exist, and they deserve to be remembered.